Thank you for coming along to what I'm sure is going to be a fantastic discussion. I'm Kirsty and I will be moderating this evening. As a member of UQ Alumni myself and also a current PhD student of tonight's speaker, I am very pleased to be joining you all tonight. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, wherever that may be for each of us. And I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So before we get started, I have just a little bit of housekeeping. You'll notice that your video and audio has been automatically switched off. But if at any time you have a question, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. And we'll have some time at the end to pass those questions along to the speaker and hear their answers. So this event is a part of UQ's Global Leadership Series, which is designed to be a program of thought-provoking discussions for UQ alumni. Tonight, we will be hearing from Dr. James Kirby, who is a senior lecturer here at UQ, as well as a practicing clinical psychologist. James is particularly interested in compassion and evaluates compassion-focused programs, as well as what fears, blocks, and resistances people have towards compassion. He also holds a visiting fellowship at the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University, and he continues to work as a clinical psychologist, helping individuals with self-criticism and shame. Now, I think most of us would agree that 2020 has been a stressful and uncertain year, and this may have triggered some increased feelings of anxiety in many of us and the people that we know. Even in less turbulent times, 1 in 4 people experience anxiety at some stage in their life. So this evening, we wanted to turn our focus towards one of the most common mental health conditions in Australia. James has worked with anxiety from a variety of perspectives, from clinical practice to research and education. So this evening, James will be discussing anxiety, its functions, and how we can understand and validate our experiences of anxiety. He will also be sharing some practical tips that we can implement ourselves, and I'm told he might also actually guide us through a short exercise. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dr. James Kirby.
Oh, Kirsty, what an introduction. Thank you very much. And it's lovely to be here with you all. I'm just going to share my screen. So I've got some slides that'll just guide us through tonight. So hopefully it's now showing my screen. And yeah, as Kirsty mentioned, I'll be talking tonight about anxiety, really, and how perhaps many of us might be experiencing more anxiety than what we would typically because of that virus that we can see here on the screen there, COVID-19. So it certainly has made things different, challenging for many of us. So I'll be talking a little bit tonight, not only about anxiety and what we mean by anxiety, but I'll be talking about anxiety and contextualizing it with a COVID background. So we'll see how we go there. And then after that, I'll kind of mention a little bit about what would be anxiety's function, what's its purpose. We experience it, but what's it trying to tell us? What are we to do with this anxiety? And then after that, hopefully I can guide you through a couple of little exercises that might be helpful to help when anxiety does come and it does feel a bit overwhelming and stressful. So I'll guide you through a couple of different exercises there. That'll be at the end. And as we go through those exercises, please don't feel like you have to do them. You can just listen if you'd like. But obviously the exercises, if we can do them together, it could be quite helpful potentially to experience it. And then of course, you're free to ask me any questions there after the presentation. And Kirsty's mentioned that on the Q&A. Please write any questions that you're interested in. So the Global Leadership Series would typically be delivered in the evening at Customs House, I believe. And if you were at Customs House and we had just finished our wonderful presentation and we were walking back to the car, if you were walking back to your car and if you were to be met by this, what goes through your body? What are you feeling? Often the immediate kind of reaction to this is a fear or an anxiety response. And we can start to have some thoughts about some danger that could be lurking in this alley. Who knows, it might be completely safe, it might be very calm, but usually our reaction to seeing something like this at the night time in particular can trigger off anxiety for us. And we might even start to get a bit angry with ourselves. Oh, why did I park down there? Idiot. But yeah, so usually though, that first response is some anxiety because there's this anticipated danger. So we have what we call this anxious self. And when we have anxiety come on, there's a pattern that goes with it. And firstly, our attention tends to narrow in. So the attention sort of narrows in on the thing that's making us anxious. So all we can see is that spider. The spider can also see you, of course, but first thing we see is that spider. And that's all we can see. And we're really staying focused on the danger because it's important to know where the danger is coming from, of course. We might scan our environment too. And the scanning is often to see if there's any other danger, any other predator or fear or threats around. But also we scan to see if we can escape. So that's usually the first thing we do. And then we might have thoughts, oh God, get out of here, hide, run away. And when we experience those thoughts, we don't usually experience them in a very calm way, like, oh, I should get out of here. Usually the thoughts have a little bit more urgency or pressure behind them, like a get out of here, hide, escape. And then with that comes a physiological response. So our heart rate will quicken. We'll have our sympathetic system be activated. And the sympathetic system is very important to help us with goal-directed behavior and activation of our bodies. And you'll start to notice in your body these different kinds of things that can emerge. So some people, they'll notice sweating or shaky legs. They get stomach pains or butterflies, things like this. There can be a lot of tension in the shoulders as well. And then all of this can eventually lead to certain behaviors. And those behaviors are typically things to avoid or escape or run away, if we can. Now, if we can't, in a certain situation, if we can't get away or we've been seen, as it were, we might be very submissive. You might even go, here, take my phone, take my money, please just leave me, I'm no threat. We do that kind of submissive thing. So we give off this impression that we're not a threat. You can get what you want. There's no need to hurt me. And so they're typical ways or anxiety will show itself. So it'll show itself and this pattern will emerge. And I'm sure many of us can resonate with that pattern of the anxious self very easily. And so when we have this anxiety kick in, and I experienced it just the other night, actually, when I was giving a Zoom talk to my students. I was mid-lecture, then bang, this line popped out and got me. Scared the living daylights out of me, as you can see. That's the kind of startle reaction that we can experience when there's an immediate danger. And so anxiety will come in and it will signal to us that there's a danger around. Now, of course, lions aren't that prevalent in Brisbane, thank goodness. If we were to see a lion, that would be quite extraordinary. But there are other dangers, of course, that will signal anxiety or some fear, if you will. And they will be things like heights or spiders for some. Also, when we're evaluated. So when we're evaluated, that often brings in a lot of anxiety, fear of what you might get or hopefully not get. We can also be very anxious and worried and concerned about relationships out of fear of rejection, because that brings a lot of hurt. And of course, there's also a lot of social media where we can also experience lots of anxiety about whether or not if your posts or comments will be liked or not liked or something will be said about it. On top of that, when we're out and we're socializing, we can take a lot of care in our appearance and be concerned with how we look. And we can sometimes be worried, so we can spend extra time on how we look and how we present ourselves because we're worried about people laughing at us again. And that kind of ties into that rejection. They're usually a lot of the common ones, the things of evaluation and judgment and rejection that can underpin a lot of the anxiety that emerges, but we can be anxious about anything. Who knew that we would be so anxious with crowds, for example? We're very anxious with crowds at the moment. If we were to be surrounded by a lot of people like this right now, I imagine a lot of you would feel very repulsed or anxious about that, out of fears that perhaps something bad would be caught in terms of COVID. And a lot of us was very anxious about whether or not we can get our hands on some toilet paper. I mean, there are incredible scenes on the news in the supermarkets in Australia, at least. With just trying to get access to that and the fears and worries of not being able to get that because what that means. So anything has the potential to become a signal to let us know that we should be anxious or worried. And people will have very different signals that will trigger anxiety. But there are some of those common ones around rejection or some in particular danger when it comes to perhaps physical. Now, anxiety at its worst can show itself as a panic attack. Now, some of you tonight listening may have experienced a panic attack. They're awful. They include a range of symptoms that emerge very quickly, and it can kind of give the impression that you're having a heart attack. So you can have that pounding of the heart, lots of trembling, feels like you can't breathe, for example. You also get this pain in the heart, kind of chest region, which gives the indication that there could be a heart attack. And this is often a difficult one too, this fear of losing control or going crazy. Because often a panic attack will just emerge, it'll just happen. It can be very difficult sometimes to spot what the trigger was to the panic attack. And that becomes quite scary for individuals, because the panic attack could happen anywhere. And then you can become fearful of having another panic attack. Now, a lot of us might not get to the point of a panic attack, but many of us would have experienced like an anxiety attack, like a huge rush of anxiety coming on. And it's not a pleasant experience at all, but it's all there. All of these signals are there to try to tell us something's not quite right. There is some kind of danger. They're not pleasant to feel, these things, but the purpose is around to let us know that, hey, something's not quite right. You need to protect yourself. Now, when people have a panic attack, usually, and in therapy, I've seen quite a few clients, for example, who've had panic attacks. Usually, the person will, contact the ambulance, go into hospital, go to emergency, and they'll have a full body check, and it will come back that it wasn't anything physical, it was psychological, and it was a panic attack, and perhaps it would be useful to go see a psychologist. And usually at that point, and this is the real kicker to all of this, the person can feel very embarrassed about overreacting to the panic. And they can even feel ashamed of going to that kind of extreme, as it were, to hospital, when it was not anything physical, wasn't anything to do with having a heart attack. And so when they come to therapy to see me, not only are they dealing with the fears of the anxiety and the panic attack coming back, but they're also dealing with the shame that they're experiencing over going to the hospital, and very worried that others will find out that they aren't able to control, as it were, this anxiety. So anxiety has this sort of superpower that it can just jump to the worst conclusions in a single bound. It can be quite frustrating in that way. But not only can we have a lot of external threats that can trigger the anxiety, and that's what I've really been talking about. So, the line or the heights or the spiders or the rejection from others, perhaps that's other people and those other people evaluating us. They're all external, they're in the environment. We can also have a lot of internal threats as well. So our brains have the capacity to judge, evaluate, and question everything that we're experiencing, even the emotions you're experiencing. So if you start to question how you're thinking and feeling, that brings in doubt, which is connected to anxiety, which is connected to worry. And so we can get ourselves caught up in all sorts of anxious and worry loops just within our own minds. We don't have to have the threats immediate around us at all. So we come from both places, the external world and our internal world, and you can kick off these dreadful anxiety loops. And that's no one's fault. That's just how our minds work. But I've kind of been interchanging between anxiety and fear, and they are different. So anxiety is much more associated with future problems. So they're more drawn out emotional reactions, like a persistent worry. You're on edge because something's coming up, perhaps a big event, a talk on Zoom, perhaps. But there can also be kind of subjective aspect here. It's kind of subjectively experienced as being out of proportion to what the actual threat is. So you might have this real fear that something terrible is going to happen, but it's actually, well, it's a talk. What is the worst that can happen? So there can kind of be this out of proportion aspect to it, which again, for people who struggle with anxiety, that can be very embarrassing, awkward, something they can experience shame about because they quote unquote shouldn't be like that. So it becomes quite tricky for individuals who do struggle with anxiety. On the flip, fear is much more about imminent danger. It really builds quickly and intensely. And on top of that, the idea behind it is to get you activated straight away, to get you going, to get some kind of body movement. So, when I was on that Zoom lecture and that lion was in the background, I don't want to be thinking to myself, oh, I wonder if that lion has already had a meal. He doesn't look that hungry. I'm more focused on my lecture here, because if we were to go through that pathway, that's obviously going to be problematic, and any delay could be a real risk. So that's why it comes in, the fear comes in so quickly and sharply. To have another diagram to kind of point it out, there's the fish, there's the predator and the shark. And the fish has that immediate fear or stress response. The body's stress system goes into action, like the pattern we spoke about right at the beginning. Whereas with anxiety, there's no external threat immediate, but we might be thinking about, what if that big bad fish, that shark, comes out today? And just by thinking about it, we've activated all of our stress response in our bodies. So our brain is not good at discerning, is it an external or internal? If it's internal and you're just generating it in your mind and imagining it, it will kick off the body's response systems as if it were there. And that's why many of us can have our most anxious moments through purely our minds, as opposed to what's in our environment around us. And there's been many people who have studied anxiety and fear a great deal. And this is really just here. This is work done by Joseph Ledoux. He's one of the world leaders in fear and anxiety, and really just putting forward some science behind that claim that, of course, fear is much more to do with immediate and imminent harm, as opposed to anxiety, where it's uncertainty and it's more in the distance in terms of space and time. So the nature of anxiety is such that we all experience it. We will all experience different levels of anxiety. And it has a pattern that comes with it. It'll shape your attention, your thoughts, your physiology, body, and behavior. And anxiety can be very helpful. So it warns us of threats and prompts us to take steps to prevent these threats from being overwhelming. So it might even lead you to do good preparation. Now, some people talk about this idea of an inverted U for anxiety. And that means an inverted U in regards to performance. So if you've got too much anxiety, it would lead to a very poor performance. If you have no anxiety at all, it might not be a very good performance, because you lack the energy and the excitement that can be very helpful in order for you to anticipate and be on your game face for the actual event that you need to perform for. So it's often spoken about having a moderate level of anxiety can be particularly helpful to get our systems and our bodies going. However, anxiety can also be quite unhelpful for many people. So anxiety has a big avoidance aspect to it. And if you're avoiding a lot of things, it can really limit your living. It restricts what you can do. You might not even leave the house out of fear. And that's a tragic circumstance. On top of that, anxiety can be very intense, as we mentioned, with the panic attack. And if the anxiety is intense and it's been around for a long time, many months even, if not years for some, and it stops and restricts you from doing the things that are important to you, then an anxiety disorder may be a possibility. And if you feel that there are some things that resonate strongly with you here, certainly thinking about reaching out to a psychologist or someone in mental health to assist with that can be helpful. Our therapies are very good at helping with anxiety, that is for sure. But I suppose this talk's all within the setting and context of COVID. And as I was trying to put forward, anxiety really comes when we're presented with danger. You don't have to look far to be signaled with danger with COVID. Every minute almost there's an update on how the virus is spreading. Unfortunately, Victoria is, of course, going through an awful little period at the moment. And I see New Zealand, it's sort of spiked again there as well. And when we even hop on our just general news sites, there's many instances of danger and warning, and we get tally updates on, how many cases there are, thankfully how many have recovered, but also how many deaths there've been. And we're just faced with this constantly. We just get pinged. Now, the thing is, you're already dealing with lots of stress as it is. Those stresses are different for everyone, but, perhaps family stress, work stress. And then if you put on top of that this kind of stress as well, and it's getting pinged a lot, it can really put us on edge. And that's where a lot of tension can come through. And that tension can ripple out and impact our relationships and also impact our own mental health and well-being. That's no one's fault. This is just how it works. This is just how it unravels. And last week on Q&A, for example, we had a psychiatrist, Killian Ash, talk about how there's this unprecedented stress on the community and unprecedented levels of anxiety in the community. But letting people know that services are available if you need them. And there have been some movements made to make access to mental health support more easy, which is absolutely fantastic. But no one anticipated going into 2020 that we would be faced with this pandemic and the issues that it brings. And what we do know about how the pandemic has had an impact on us, because we've had it now for many months, we've been able to collect some solid data letting us know how it has impacted our mental health. In Australia, at least, depression and anxiety as disorders have increased by 200-300%. Compared to non-pandemic times. I mean, that's an extraordinary jump. I mean, that's very significant. And it's not just us, and this is the whole key facet here. Everywhere this is happening. So as a result of this pandemic and what it's impacted on our lives, all of us are experiencing heightened stress and tension, and we're seeing double to triple the rates of mental health concerns. But it's not just the virus itself that's causing those increases. It's the rippling effects that the virus has. I mean, because of what we're having to do in response to the virus, we've seen levels of unemployment increase. That itself causes stress. Financial stress is occurring. People having difficulty with sleep, alcohol use. Unfortunately, because of some of the lockdown measures, we've seen spikes in domestic violence, which is a tragic outcome. People have had to delay medical treatment, particularly if you've got some kind of chronic health condition where you needed regular care because of the influx of patients coming in with COVID. That had to be delayed, which means people were living with pain for longer and not getting the treatment that they needed. Not only that, a lot of us have been put into situations where we've had to quarantine, for example, or isolate from others. And isolate from others when we're also feeling unwell. And children have also had to experience a lot of disruption, and not getting to socialize is a big miss for the kids, to not be able to have their birthdays with their friends and so on. Now, things are changing, which is fantastic, and more of this is starting to occur, but there's still a lot of uncertainty with all of this, which makes it very difficult. And because of the constant uncertainty, and that leads to risk always being able to be turned up very sharply, very quickly. And it can make us feel like we're constantly walking on eggshells, knowing that something disastrous is just around the corner. And that, of course, has impact. When you're dealing with all of these other factors at the same time, something's going to give. And that's no one's fault, because this is pressure that we're not prepared really to manage. And on that particular episode of Q&A, they really made this point around our health systems, and our mental health care systems in particular have not been designed to manage this. So we've already got a system that's underprepared for this, to be helpful and to be supportive. And not only all of this is happening, we're losing a lot of social connection as well. So, I mean, I'm guessing this would have happened to some of you, and it certainly has happened to me. Some of us have been unable to go to funerals to say our goodbyes. Now, in the moment, that hurts a lot, but that's also an ongoing hurt, and it might come back at a later point and really affect us. There's been births, and sometimes dad hasn't even been able to be in the hospital, or if he has, it's only been able to be there for 2 hours to help support mum and welcome the new life into this world. And on top of that, there's been a lot of weddings that have had to be postponed or cancelled, or they've happened with only themselves. And these are important rituals as part of being human that we go through. They help with closure, and they help with happiness, and bringing our people together in times of joy. And to not have those, or to have those limited and impacted, and the uncertainty that comes with it again, is very stressful for people. There's big loss there. So as a result, when these things happen, not only can we feel sad by it, but we can get angry. We can get angry that this stuff is happening. Why weren't we better prepared? We should have been better prepared. But we can also be worried about, well, when will I be able to get married? When will that time happen? When will we be able to come together in this way? So how we think about COVID is really very important. We initially used terms such as social distancing as a way to be helpful in how we manage this and limit the infection rates of COVID. But many organisations, including the World Health Organization, have been against that term. They prefer physical distancing, because at the moment we need to socialise. We need to socialise and connect with people more than ever. Myself and others, in particular Professor Paul Gilbert from the UK, a clinical psych, have been pushing this term of what we really need to be focused on is safe relating. We need to be relating with people right now, because we know when things are stressful and we are anxious, one of the best coping strategies we have is to turn to somebody. But when we do turn to them, do it safely. So the idea of distancing implies perhaps there's risk there we've got to stay away from. And I know it might be just subtle in terms of the language, but this is where we do need each other more than ever. But we just do it safely, much like we do other things safely too. We drive safely, we use hygiene safely, and we have to do this safely. So I guess what I'm really trying to put forward is this idea that, you know, if we are able to relate safely and compassionate with each other during this period, this could have a really big impact on our minds and the emotions and the anxieties that we feel, but also on the behaviors that we engage in. And because it's really important, although we've had a lot of isolation, loneliness has not increased at the same rate as the isolation. And some of the reasons put forward as to why this could be the case is because we're coming together as communities to try to stop this. So you've got that sense of shared identity with your community, solidarity, if you will. But also people are doing a lot of creative online connections. For example, we've got this webinar going on, grandparents are jumping on FaceTimes and so on. And we're still trying to connect in other ways, which is incredibly important for us. So we're relating a lot, but we're just having to do it safely. If we focus on the distancing and the fear, I saw this fantastic meme on the internet, we can start to see each other as being potentially a real risk. And so we want to keep away, stay away. We can be paranoid that the virus could be anywhere and we might get it. So anybody could be a real threat. There was a really amazing study actually done at the University of Chicago by Jordan and colleagues this year that tried to look at ways we do messaging in public health to get people to engage in these safe behaviors, in particular of washing your hands, not shaking or hugging, and also avoiding touching your face. And they had 3 messages: a personal message. So everything exactly the same in these flyers, except for these wordings here. So this was a personal messaging. So follow these steps to avoid getting it. This is a public one, avoid spreading it. Or a personal and public, avoid getting and spreading. And they were looking at what was the most effective at getting those behaviors started. And I would have thought it would have been personal. That would have been my guess, because I thought that would give the most urgency to engage in the behavior. But the most effective was the public messaging. And that's really important because it shows that we care about other people. And promoting pro-social motivations are important. They matter, partly because we rely on other people, but also we know from big meta-analyses with tens of thousands of participants that we copy pro-social behavior as well. If we see someone act pro-socially, we will act pro-socially, or we're more likely to act pro-socially, I should say. So how we talk about this is really important because it can have a big impact on the behaviors that we do. And ultimately, it's the behaviors that we do relating safely with each other, which is going to have a big impact for how we spread the virus, but also how we feel during this time as well in our mental health. And so it's important to remember that during this period, it is very easy to focus on the frightening things. As I said, you just have to hop on any of the social medias or a newspaper or TV, and you will be bombarded with danger, danger, danger. And when that comes up, we'll get anxious. That's just how it works. And the media does a great job of trading in tragedy. Just some of the stories you hear of the terrible things that are happening to people. It's constantly keeping us in this kind of threat zone, if you will. It's really important for us, though, to remember that thousands and thousands of health workers have returned to work. I read one study in the UK where they had 50,000 health workers return to work in order to help people who are suffering with COVID-19. And there's been hundreds and thousands of volunteers in all walks of life and domains of areas that have gone and given up their time to help, whether it be delivering meals and transportation or helping out at hospitals. Not only that, health workers are working overtime, but not just them. A lot of other workers have been working overtime. You know, I've been in awe of what staff have been doing at schools, at supermarkets, and so on. And they've really had to deal with some very challenging behaviours, again, that no one asked for and no one predicted. But people are doing a lot in trying to stay engaged with their work so that they can help others as best they can. So when we do this safe relating, it's important for us to remember that many are showing we just don't live for me, me. We're not, you know, we can be extremely self-focused, but right now we're actually seeing a huge focus on the needs of others. And there are many people in this world who are putting their lives at risk in order to help others. It's extraordinary. And it's important even to, you know, recognize how many have given their lives to help save others. I mean, it's terribly sad, but it's important for us to understand what that means. We live in a world and a society where people, despite the real danger, the real risk, wanted to go to help others. So if you were really sick and there was a chance that they could get sick as well, they still thought it was important to go out there and help you. To live in a society like that, it's incredible. It's amazing. And to recognize that and to come to contact with that. Yes, there's a lot of danger, but we also live in a world where people do care about each other and want the best for each other. And that's extraordinary. So I've touched a little bit now on anxiety and anxiety in the context of COVID. And I've really pointed already a little bit towards what the function of anxiety is, but I just want to expand a little bit more on the function and kind of bring the function into beyond just anxiety, but our threat emotions in general. So to understand emotions really means you have to understand our motivations, or what we need as being human. And all animals have motivations or motives or needs. So they seek out things that are important to them. So food, shelter, relationship, status. Statuses can be very important in hierarchical groups, reproduction and so on. And what happens is emotions guide us as we're moving towards those motivations and goals. So if we're succeeding, bang, we'll feel happiness or we'll be excited by that. If they're being threatened or they're being impeded, that's when we can start to feel anxiety and anger. So those emotions act as signals letting us know how we're going with our pursuits of these motives. And you can look at the emotions in isolation, but it can sometimes be more helpful for us to group them in terms of their function. In the work I do and others, we group these emotions in terms of three big areas. The first major area is on emotions that help keep us protected in times of threat. The second lot are focused on helping us achieve and do things. And the final lot are those emotions that help us get that sense of peacefulness, contentment, being in a calm place. So they're the three major emotion regulation systems that I'm going to talk about now. And we've very creatively referred to this as the 3 circles model. So in this 3 circles model, we firstly have our threat system, the red circle, we just call it. And in the red circle, it's all about threat, self-protect. So as you can imagine, the emotions that go along with this circle are things like anxiety that we've been talking about, fear, anger as well, disgust. And all of these emotions are letting us know that there is potential danger and we'll need to protect ourselves in some way. Now, this is our default setting. You know, this is the system that's going to hijack any other system. So we might be busy doing something, but as soon as a little bit of threat comes in, bang, our attention will come straight back to whatever that is, whatever the danger is. It's going to focus in on that. So that's what we need it to operate as in order to keep us alive, of course. So that's the red circle. We then have our blue circle. And in the blue circle, this is all about wanting and doing things. It's very incentive focused. And we can want and pursue many different things. A lot of us want and pursue a good house, for example, a partner. We want to do well at our jobs and get promoted, do well on exams and so on. To elevate us to status, because the higher we are up, the more access to resource we can get as well, and that can be particularly helpful for us. And when those things are going well, we have those great emotions that come with it. We can have real joy, excitement, satisfaction, and they're wonderful, pleasant emotions to experience. Now, they're positive and they're very intense positive emotions. We can also have less intense emotional responses. And these are still positive, but they're more about being a sense of calm, a sense of safeness, which is different to safety. So in the red circle, you're trying to get to safety because you're threatened. You have a safeness, you have a freedom just to be open, and you're content. And we call this the green circle. Very creative again. Now, these systems will regulate each other. And often what we will do in therapy after we've explained this to a client and gone through this with them, and we'll ask them, just draw your circles with how much time you spend in it. So just draw them in proportion. And often what we'll get is something back like this. They're there because they're very stressed and anxious, even angry with what's going on. And right now, all of us, I suspect, would have a very big red circle because of what's going on in the environment around us. The drive systems are usually still pretty big because they're still wanting and doing things. I mean, part of coming to therapy is a want to not feel the way they're feeling. But their green circle is always relatively small, sometimes much, much smaller than this. There's not often times in the day where there's the sense of just being content or peace, or at peace or calm. And as I mentioned, there are many things in our environment that are just going to kick this red circle off. So COVID's one of them. So COVID is going to kick that red circle off. Despite if everything else is going really well, it's still going to impact that red circle. And we don't just hear about once a day, we hear about it many, many times over during the day. So it's continuously activating that red circle. But we can also learn that relationships, of course, can be dangerous. We can learn from a very early age this idea of rejection and not being wanted by others. And that's an archetypal fear that we have as humans, to not be wanted by others or not be seen to be included or feeling like we belong with people is a very dangerous thing for us because we rely so heavily on others. So we can become quite scared of other people, and you can't help but think as we return back to work and hopefully other events, social events, that there might be some of that fear there around the social relating. People who are usually the source of comfort have potentially started to become more of a source of fear. And it's interesting to think about those who have had COVID and recovered. Are they seen in a different light, perhaps, than those who never had it? And we're constantly being evaluated, and that constant sense of evaluation can bring a lot of worry in for people, and it can constantly be triggered. And we can feel like we're being evaluated constantly on our body shape, body appearance, our image. Just our Facebook pages, for example, are a lot of impression management that people can evaluate us on. And of course, the exams and so on. And my heart goes to a lot of the grade 12ers at the moment who are going through really difficult times with exams as they transition into university life. Now, what can happen is you experience these emotions, these threat emotions, particularly around anxiety. That's what I'm focused on mostly. But then how we relate to that anxiety becomes very important. And so I just have a little kind of analogy to this to kind of demonstrate how it tends to work. So a zebra, there's nothing a zebra likes to do more than graze in the savannah or graze all day. I took this photo actually in Africa. And they'll graze all day. But if the zebra was to hear a little rustling coming from the bushes, what's the zebra do? Well, it becomes alert and it bolts, right? It's the better safe than sorry principle. And we tend to work and operate in a similar manner. But they bolt and they get to safety in the savannah. And then when they're in safety, what's the zebra do? Well, it goes back to grazing, doing what it loves to do. So if we were to graph the zebra's emotional trajectory across time, what we'll notice is, yes, there will be immediate rush of sympathetic drive or fear or anxiety for the zebra as it tries to get out of harm's way. But then, as it's in that safety part of the savannah, the arousal will drop. Now, if you put a human mind in that zebra, if you even put my mind in that zebra, what we tend to do when we get to safety is we tend to go over it. We start to go, oh my God, did anyone see any lions? How many were there? God, could you imagine being eaten alive. It's going to be so painful. Apparently they go for the neck and suffocate you. It'd just be a tragic way to die. And then we might go to sleep, and then we might wake up at 2 a.m. Oh God, what if there's more of them tomorrow? And then what can happen, of course, is we can start to criticize ourselves. You idiot, why did you let yourself be seen by these lines? And what that does is it keeps your emotional level elevated for a much longer period of time. This is really important because the external threat's no longer there. It's gone. But what we tend to do is bring that external threat, internalize it, play it over in our minds, and that keeps the body's stress response system constantly going. And then we can start to criticize ourselves. So how we relate to experiencing anxiety, and if we come in with criticism, we just compound it even more. And we can make life very difficult for ourselves. It's no fault of our own. This is just typical of how we will react to different situations. And a Stanford biologist, Robert Sapolsky, actually wrote a book on this very issue called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, indicating that it's our capacity to hold this threat in mind, even when the threats aren't there, that causes us a great deal of physiological stress, but also mental health stress. So when we have this system operating in this way, we've got an over-dominant threat system, we tend to regulate it by trying to push ourselves harder. So just say if you've experienced some kind of disappointment, failure, or setback, because you're still striving for your goals and the things that are important to you. If you have some kind of setback like that, what do? Well, you regulate it with your red circle typically, and you start to criticize yourself. So you direct the anger towards yourself because that's your most dominant system. So if things are not going as well as we'd like, we can often compound it by getting critical or angry with what we've done or haven't done. And we can even start to call ourselves names, and that can make things quite difficult for individuals. And as Kirsty mentioned right at the beginning, I do a lot of work with individuals who struggle with self-criticism and shame. And usually they criticize themselves for the emotions that they're experiencing, for their reactions to stressful events. And it's the criticism that comes in after it that causes all the damage, which is very painful for individuals. That's because the most common way they regulate their emotions is through these two systems. So what I usually do in my work, and this is work we're doing at the University of Queensland, is we try to take a compassionate orientation. And the compassion orientation is really directed towards developing this green circle. You're never going to be able to get rid of any of those emotions. And knowing now that it's there to help protect us from danger, why would you want to get rid of those emotions? But most often when a person comes into therapy and they're really struggling with anxiety, when I ask them, what would you like from therapy? The response is usually to get rid of my anxiety. Now, that's just something we cannot do. And it's no one's fault for experiencing it. But we just have to understand what the purpose, what the function of it is, and start to validate people's reactions to it, as opposed to getting into those critical shame cycles that can occur so commonly. So what we try to do is develop that green circle, as I mentioned. So we've talked about anxiety, COVID, and the function of anxiety. Now I just wanted to spend a little bit of time, with the time we've got left, introducing some exercises that could potentially be helpful with your anxiety. Now there's hundreds of different strategies that you could use for anxiety, going for a run, reading books, talking to friends. But I'm going to take us through some specific compassion-based exercises that have been shown through the research that not only we've been doing, but others around the world have been shown to be very helpful at reducing your anxiety. Because it's very important. This is something I kind of missed. Your red and blue circles are linked into your sympathetic system, which is all about activating your body for defense, right? To either run away or fight, whatever the threat is. So it's very stimulating of the body. Whereas your green circle is much more linked into your parasympathetic system, which is about a calming and a groundedness of your body. So what we try to do for individuals is try to strengthen their parasympathetic system so their body can support them in times of stress. Because what happens in times of stress, the mind is racing with thought. And if you're feeling anxious and stressed, and you turn to someone and they say to you, just calm down, that often doesn't work very well. And just even getting you to think about it from a different perspective is also extremely difficult. So that's why we say, let's get into the body first. And if we can ground the body, that will start to free up the mind a little bit. But first, we just have a little look at the nature of mind. And then we do a couple of exercises just looking at your body posture and working on a breathing technique called soothing rhythm breathing. And then we finish with just a tiny little bit of compassion I'm going to bring in. Just a tiny little bit of compassion because I have to, because it's fun. So first thing first is to sort of just do a very quick exercise looking at the nature of mind. So as I say, this is the part where I'm asking you to engage in a practice or a little exercise. If you feel like you don't want to, of course, you don't have to. None of these will be stressful. I'm sure it will be fine. But if you prefer just to sit back and enjoy your dinner or something, please feel free to do that. But the first exercise is, for the next 20 seconds, you are to think about absolutely nothing. So your instruction is to think nothing for the next 20 seconds. Okay, it's not quite 20 seconds, but what typically happens after that experiment, a very brief one, mind you, is we recognize that it's very hard to do nothing. So some of you may have distracted yourself towards something. You may have just focused on your breath, for example. Others may be saying to themselves, don't think anything, don't think anything. So we learn very quickly when we tell our mind to do something, it can often do the exact opposite. And we can do this again. This time, I don't want you to think of a white polar bear or a pink elephant. You can't think of either of these two creatures, a polar bear or a pink elephant. So for the next 20 seconds, you cannot think of these two images. Okay, well, not quite 20 seconds, but again, I suspect some of you would have learned very quickly that it's hard to keep those images out, and you do think about them. They do come back. Not only that, if you did manage not to think about it during that short period of time, you would have been through some kind of distraction strategy. So, okay, I'm going to focus in on something. Again, it could be the breath, but it could be something else, or you could try to bring something else to front of mind. That you can do that for the short term. That can work a little bit. But to do that and hold that for a longer period of time becomes very difficult. So what we start to notice is what we tell our mind to do, the mind will do the opposite. So if you tell yourself, don't think something, actually what you've done is you've created a rule where it's more likely that you will experience it. But so often in times of stress, we tell ourselves, don't think it, don't worry about it, forget it. But what we're doing is we're increasing the likelihood of it coming back up. And if it does come back up, the thought or whatever it is we're trying to put out of mind, it can actually make things quite difficult for us, because when it comes up, we can think to ourselves, oh, what's wrong with me? Why can't I keep it out of mind? So that's a really important part, just recognizing how jumpy the mind is. The next step is then to bring in this little breathing technique. And so this will take about maybe 2.5 minutes just to let everyone know, and then we'll get into the Q&A. But I just want to spend just a couple of minutes on this breathing technique, and it brings in the compassion. Then I'm done. So with this breathing technique, what's important with breathing is setting your body posture up. So this is all part of the step 2. So the body posture should be one where your feet are flat on the floor, your shoulders are back, your chest is open. And what this does is this body position helps open up your diaphragm. And then you leave your hands just flat on the top of your legs. And this is the position that we want to try to breathe in. Now, if you'd like, and if you can, just move your hands forward, down your legs, over your knees, down your shins, and just try breathing from this position, taking a couple of deep breaths. And then just come back up, have your hands back on the top of your legs, shoulders back, chest open, and just breathing from this position. What's the easier body posture? Well, that one. But it's very important, because when we're anxious, our body curls in, right? We'll curl straight in. Whenever we're worried or stressed, the body will curve in. We'll feel a lot of tension in our shoulders, even get tension headaches and get tight jaws. A lot of us will spend a lot of time like me at the computer, and again, your body's curled over, or just even driving. Now, when your body is in that position, it is unable to activate the diaphragm, and you will not see improvements in your parasympathetic system. So that's why we spend a lot of time emphasizing the importance of the body posture, so you can engage your diaphragm and strengthen your parasympathetic system, which you can do, and which we've found you can do in studies here at UQ. So you get into that body posture position. Then we're going to get into a style of breathing where you breathe in for 5 and out for 5. And you want to have a smooth breath. So it's not a hold and then collapse of the breath. It's a smooth in, smooth out. Now I'll do count us in for 5, but if you find 5-5 too tricky, stick with a rhythm that works for you. The key is to keep the same pattern. So if you do 4 in, 4 out, stay with 4-4. If you prefer a slightly longer out breath, that's fine. So you can do a 3 in, 4 out, or whatever it might be. Just play around with the different patterns for yourself. But then once you've found one, the key is to stay with it. That is when you will see an impact on your parasympathetic system. So I'll just guide us through this exercise now. So just get into your chair, sitting upright, shoulders back, chest open, opening up your diaphragm. And if you'd like, just close your eyes, or you can cast your gaze downwards. And to begin, just become aware of your breath. Don't change anything. Just become aware of the coming and going. And now I'm just going to gently bring in a count and just follow this count of breathing. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just go with that pattern for the next minute. Play around with your different breathing patterns, but once you've found one, stay with it. If your mind wanders, just notice what it drifted off to. You can even just label it. Okay, that's dinner, or that's hunger, or boredom. And then just come back to your breath. Seeing if you can start to notice a slowing down in the body and a grounding in the body. And just to finish this exercise, we'll just do a small compassionate wish. So just bring to mind someone you really care about. So just bring to mind and create an image of them in your mind as if you're seeing them, or someone you really care about. I suspect there are hundreds of people you care about, but just pick one for this evening. You can do the others later. And just notice how this person who you've picked is trying their best in this world. They have their strong points, their good qualities. They also have the things that don't go so well, and they can struggle from time to time. It's just the ebbs and flows of life. And you might like to just wish this person the following compassionate wishes. May you be safe. May you be peaceful. May you be healthy. May you live with ease. Just letting go of that person now. And if you can, just bring yourself into your mind's eye. And just recognizing that you just find yourself here as part of the flow of life. And you have your really strong, good qualities. And you can also experience things that don't go so well. It's just part of the ebbs and flows of life. And just offer yourself those 4 compassionate wishes. May I be safe. May I be peaceful. May I be healthy. May I live with ease. Just starting to let go of that imagery now. Start to get a better sense of the world around you and the contact your body's making with the chair. And when you're ready, just come back into the room. And that finishes up those exercises. I know I've gone for a little bit longer, but I just wanted to get those exercises in. If you're interested in any of those exercises, you can hop on our website there in the school, or just type into Google Compassionate Mind Research Group. That's my lab there where we do all of our research at UQ. You know the campus well. But if you go there, there'll be a link that you can click on, the Compassion Initiative. And if you click on that, there's a whole bunch of different resources, but all the tracks that we use that can be helpful for stress and anxiety are there. And you can download them for free or listen and stream them straight from the website. So they're all there for you. But thank you very much. And I think there's time for some questions now.
Thank you for that, James. That was really fantastic. I feel very calm now, even after just a few minutes.
You there, okay. Kirsty?
Yeah, I'm here. Are you there?
I'll just end my show. Zoom. How frustrating. Okay, it should be working now.
You can hear me?
No.
Oh no.
Let's go here.
Okay. All right, James.
Yeah, there we are. Gotcha.
There we are.
There we are.
Well, thank you for that. That was great. I'm sure many of us took a lot from that. Those tips were really helpful. And that practice, even just a couple of minutes, was really calming. So thank you for that. We have a few questions, so I might jump straight into those.
Yep.
We've had somebody ask, how accurate is this particular questionnaire to determine if someone is suffering from anxiety and depression? And they've put a link up to openpsychometrics.org, and it's the DASS, so the Depression, Anxiety and Stress Scale.
Yep. I mean, it's a useful tool. It has cutoffs. It's been used in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. So we've got a lot of data on that particular scale. And it will give cutoffs. So give us cutoffs of typical ranges, mild, elevated ranges, moderate. But it can't be used in just isolation. So it's just one tool you would use to help guide you, to give you a sense of how I'm experiencing my anxiety. But it would be used hand in hand with clinical assessment as well. So seeing someone for it as well is extremely important.
Great. So someone else has also asked, how might you build resiliency in children? They've specified particularly children under 5.
Okay. I mean, it's not the exact focus of what I was talking about tonight, but it is a very important question being asked. I mean, part of it is just being supportive. So I do a lot of work in parenting research, and the best way we can help our children through these difficult times is to be there for them, to be a sense of support, warmth, encouragement, to help them during these difficult times. I mean, the clear fact is none of us are prepared for these kinds of experiences that we're going through. So to help a child through that, the best to be is responsive, warm, and compassionate to them.
Wonderful. Somebody else has asked, what is the physiology behind the chest pain associated with anxiety? What is it that's actually hurting?
Right. So, I mean, part of it is, it's just an incredible rush that's happening, an incredible intense rush that's occurring at that time, where your heart rate is just going gangbusters, really. So it's gone from what is a typical resting heart rate up to the fastest it can possibly beat, and that can bring about the pain.
Okay. Somebody else has asked, is it okay to do the breathing exercises and meditations lying down, or do you need to be sitting on a chair for that?
Sure, it's a great question. For some people, it can be very difficult to engage the diaphragm, and so lying down can be useful to begin with. You can even put a hand on your belly just to see, is it rising and falling? I didn't go through any of that tonight, but lying down can work. Now, there's important to think about what your aim of breathing is. If your aim is to feel relaxed, lying down and doing it is absolutely fantastic. It's great. In fact, it could send you to sleep. It can be so relaxing. But if your aim is to become grounded, so you can do what you need to, whatever that situation might be, sitting upright, chest open, shoulders back is the preferable position to help engage your diaphragm.
Great. I think this is a question that a lot of us probably have. How do you bring yourself to actually sit down and meditate when you're super anxious and your mind's jumping around and you're very stressed out?
Sure, it's a great question. I mean, importantly, what we did just then with breathing was not a meditation. It was just controlling the breath. So I said close your eyes because it's often useful to do that, but of course you do not have to. I often say when we do that exercise, I ask someone, how was that for you? And someone will always say, oh yeah, I felt really tired, sleepy actually. So that probably is important information. You probably do need more sleep. But equally, my response would be, if that's the case, you do notice you become sleepy or tired as you do this, do it with your eyes open and do it standing, because we're not doing it for relaxation. We're doing it to develop our parasympathetic system and ground our bodies so that we can engage in what is stressful events or interactions or whatever the goal may be. It's like the diver on the 10-meter platform. They take a breath to compose and get an element of poise to go into action. And that's what we're really trying to do with that grounding exercise. The other part of working it in, I mean, I can't persuade you. It's up to you, right? Part of it is start to create tiny habits as best you can. So what would be the smallest amount you could do? And can you pair it with something you do often? So can you do your breathing perhaps every time you go to get a cup of coffee? Right? Or standing in line waiting for a cup of coffee. Pick a moment that you'll associate and you just do it for a tiny little bit. But ultimately, it'll be up to you if you can work it in. And I, of course, understand that there are many time pressures. I've got 2 kids myself, and it's incredibly difficult to find the time.
Those are great tips, though. Someone else has asked, is it useful to try to make friends with anxiety by understanding the positive use of it, as you described earlier?
Yeah, that's about validating the anxiety, 100%. If you start, often what can happen with these threat emotions is we can get angry or frustrated that you're experiencing the anxiety. And of course, then you've got these emotions in conflict with each other. And that can cause a paralysis or a sense of just being too overwhelmed. And I just can't, I just got to walk away from it. So part of it is you don't have to, be best friends with your anxiety, but you're understanding and thinking, okay, thank you for letting me know that something's going on. Okay, something's obviously a danger. And validate that emotional experience, and then try to go, okay, what can I do now that could be helpful? And part of that I would suggest is getting into a grounding of your body as best you can, using those compassion-based strategies. But there are different approaches to going with it though. But yes, being validating and understanding your anxiety is there for a reason is important.
Great. Somebody else has asked, can ongoing and high levels of anxiety lead to other medical problems?
Oh, well, I mean, that's a tricky one because that's going to be very dependent on the person. And if you're experiencing a lot of high anxiety, often there partly is then a factor of, are you around a lot of danger, perhaps a lot of uncertainty? And so there's a number of contributing factors that could certainly lead to health complications, but there will be a surrounding environment in which that occurs, which will be very dependent on the person. So just think of someone who's like a first responder or a paramedic. They're going to have a lot of anxiety in that job as they rush to get to help the person. Then they're going to see a lot of tragedy as well as they go to help people. Now, there'll be heightened anxiety there, but you're also being exposed to a lot of potential trauma as well. And a lot of these factors with night shift as well can start to impact our health.
True. Okay. Oh, we've got lots coming in. So, what is happening when physiological systems of anxiety, so for example, the fast heart rate, the sweating, the heavy breathing, happen before a threat is even front of mind?
Yeah, that's like a panic attack, really. Just comes in out of nowhere, and that's what's most scary about them. There seems to be no threat, no trigger, and so we become very worried about, oh goodness, when's this going to show? And then we can start to avoid things a great deal, not go out of the home, for example, because having a panic attack around people, for many people, is a worst case scenario. You don't want the attention to begin with, let alone to experience all of those unpleasant emotions as well. So it's just something that happens for us from time to time. We'll notice that it just comes in and you can't pick the trigger. And then we'll drive ourselves through this intense, laborious investigation, trying to find what it was. What is the trigger? What is the trigger? And that's just part of the anxiety loop and worry that can occur. Of course, you problem solve, try to get a sense of what it could be, what is going on in my life. But after you've done that and done a reasonable job of that, and if you can't identify anything, and I would suggest there's probably a range of life events that are occurring. And if only one thing was happening, that'd be great. That'd be fine. You'd be no dramas. But if there are a number of things happening, well, then these things can just kick off, unfortunately. It's just part of being human.
Definitely. Can you expand upon the difference between safety in the threat system and safeness in the soothing system?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I kind of rushed through that. So when you are feeling threat, you'll try to seek safety. So you try to get away from the threat. So your body's still very activated. So you still have a lot of sympathetic drive. Some people seek safety by locking themselves in their own home. And at its worst, we call that agoraphobia. You're afraid of leaving your home base because you're afraid you're not going to be able to escape another context. So that's a safety. A safety is, I have to stay here, or if I've got this with me, I will be okay. So a lot of people have safety objects. People have safety blankets, for example. But that's a sense of safety. So another, to use an analogy, like a rock climber, their safety strategy will be the harness. And you want that because you need that in order to engage in what the threatening event is, which is scaling the cliff. Safeness, on the other hand, is when you feel an openness and a freedom to explore your surroundings. So when you feel a sense of safeness, you can go out and do what you'd like to do. You can have the freedom that comes with that. A lot of people don't feel that feeling. And that's what we try to do a lot in therapy, try to create a place for them where they do feel safe and it is freeing for them to be playful, to be free. And that is what safeness allows.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. We've got time for just one more question. So this is the last one, and sorry to those that we didn't get around to. But how can we achieve the zebra mindset when the human mind tends to think and do things exactly the opposite of what we want?
Oh, it's a pain, isn't it? No one asked for this, of course. No one asked for this particular design, but this is what we got. It's very hard. The key is you can't. So if you go and try not to experience what happens with the human mind, conversely to the zebra, you're setting yourself up for something which you can never achieve. I mean, at its extreme, the Dalai Lama still meditates every morning for 4 hours. I mean, I would rather sleep for that 4 hours. But part of that is to help the monkey mind. Your mind will just be jumping around constantly. And the idea is we've got to give our mind something to do. And if you can give it something to focus in on, such as the breath, but there can be many other things you choose to focus in on, that can help slow down the jumpiness of the mind, which can bring about that sense of feeling more at ease, more calm, for example. But yeah, it's impossible to get to where the zebra is. Unless, of course, those tragic circumstances when people do have brain injuries and so on and things like that can happen. But ideally, it's just starting to become aware of the jumpiness. And when you start to become aware of it, you can then choose where you want to go and where you want to direct your attention and your thoughts.
That's great. It sounds like some of those exercises might help people to get a little bit closer to being zebras. Okay, well, that's all we have time for, I would say. So thank you again, James, for sharing your insights with us. I'm sure that many of us have a lot to take away and some exercises to look up. So for more information about the UQ alumni programming, you can visit alumni.uq.edu.au, and you can follow UQ alumni on social media. This recording will be available on that UQ alumni website later this week, probably tomorrow. When you exit the Zoom, you'll be redirected to a short survey. So if you have any thoughts or feedback you'd like to share, please fill that out. But that concludes the event this evening. So thank you again, James, for joining us, and to everyone else that stuck around.
Pleasure. Thanks, Kirsty.